Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. This fairy tale is called Schippietaro. Schippietaro. Long, long ago, in the days of fairies and giants, ogres and dragons, valiant knights and distressed damsels, in those days, a brave young warrior went out into the wide world in search of adventures. He travelled over hill and dale, and for some time he went on without meeting with anything out of the common. But at length, after journeying through a thick forest, he found himself one evening on a wild and lonely mountainside. No village was in sight, no cottage, not even the hut of a charcoal burner, so often to be found on the outskirts of the forest. He had been following a faint and much overgrown path, but at length even that was lost sight of in the dense undergrowth. Twilight was coming, and in vain he strove to recover the lost track. Each effort seemed only to entangle him more. Hopelessly it was in the briars, thick ferns and tall grasses which grew thickly on all sides. Faint and weary, he stumbled on in the fast-gathering darkness, until suddenly he came upon an eerie little temple, deserted and half-ruined, but which still contained a shrine. Here at least was shelter from the chilly dew, and, though the sinister appearance of the temple made the hair stand up on the back of his neck, here he resolved to pass the night. Food he had none, but wrapped in his thick mantle, and with his good sword by his side, he lay down, and was soon fast asleep. Toward midnight he was awakened by a dreadful noise. At first he thought it must be a dream, but the rumpus continued. The whole place resounded with the most terrible shrieks and yells. The young warrior raised himself cautiously, and, seizing his sword, peeped quietly through a hole in the ruined wall. He beheld a strange and awful sight. A troop of hideous cats were engaged in a wild and horrible dance, their yells and howling meanwhile echoing through the night. Mingled with their unearthly cries, the young warrior could clearly distinguish the words, "Tell it not, Schippietaro, listen for his bark. Tell it not to Schippietaro, keep it close and dark." A beautiful clear moon shed its light upon the gruesome scene, which the bald young warrior watched with amazement and horror at the same time. Suddenly, the midnight hour being past, the phantom cats disappeared, and all was silent once more. The rest of the night passed undisturbed, and the young warrior slept soundly until morning. When he awoke, the sun was already up, and he hastened to leave the strange scene of last night's adventure. By the bright morning light, he presently discovered traces of a path which the evening before had not been visible. This he followed, and found to his great joy that it led, not as he feared, to the forest through which he had come the day before, but in the opposite direction, toward an open plain. There he saw one or two scattered cottages, and a little further on, a village. Pressed by an awful hunger that was gnawing away in his stomach, he was making the best of his way toward the village, when he heard the tones of a woman's voice, loud in wailing and pleading. No sooner did the sounds of distress reach the warrior's ears than his hunger was forgotten, and he hurried on to the nearest cottage. He wanted to know what the matter was, if he could give any help. The people listened to his questions and, shaking their heads sorrowfully, told him that all help was in vain. Every year, they said, the mountain spirit claims a victim. This time has come, and this very night will he devour our loveliest maiden. This is the cause of all our weeping and gnashing of teeth. And when the young warrior, filled with wonder, inquired further, they told him that at sunset the victim would be put into a sort of cage, carried to that very ruined temple where he had passed the night, and there left alone. In the morning she would have vanished. So it was each year, and so it would be now. There was no help for her. The young warrior had a noble heart, and as he listened, he was filled with an earnest desire to deliver the maiden. And the mention of the ruined shrine having brought back to his mind the adventure of the night before, he asked the people whether they had ever heard the name of Schippietaro, and who and what he was. Schippietaro is a strong and beautiful dog, was the reply. He belongs to the head man of our prince, who lives only a little way from here. We often see him following his master. He is a fine and brave fellow. The young knight did not stop to talk more. He hurried off to Schippietaro's master and begged him to lend his dog for one night. The dog's master listened carefully to the warrior's strange tale, but at first was unwilling to agree to his request. At length, however, he agreed to lend Schippietaro on one condition, that he should be brought back the next day. Overjoyed, the young warrior led the dog away. Next, he went to see the parents of the unhappy maiden who was to be left out for the sacrifice. The warrior told them to keep their daughter safely in the house and watch her carefully until his return. He then placed the dog, Schippietaro, in the cage, which was then placed, instead of prepared for the maiden for the dog, with the help of some of the young men and villagers, to the ruined temple, and there it sat down in wait. The young men who had helped refused to stay one moment on that haunted spot, but hurried down the mountain as if the whole troop of hobgoblins had been at their heels. The young warrior, with no companion but the dog, remained to see what would happen. The valiant knight waited alone in the dark and in the cold, peering into the shadows, alert for any snap of a twig or rustle of undergrowth to alert him to an approach. He waited, watched and listened, watched and waited, until at midnight, when the full moon was high in the heaven and shed her light over the mountain, the phantom cats came once more. And this time they had in their midst a huge black tomcat, a fiercer and more terrible than all the rest, which the young warrior had no difficulty in knowing as the frightful mountain fiend himself. No sooner did this monster catch sight of the cage than he danced and sprang round it with yells of triumph and hideous joy, followed by his companions. When he had long enough jeered and taunted his victim, he threw open the door of the cage in excitement. Oh, but this time he met his match. The brave Schippietaro sprang upon him, and seizing him with his teeth, held him fast, while the young warrior, with one stroke of his good sword, laid the monster dead at his feet. As for the other cats, too much astonished to fly, they stood gazing at the dead body of their leader, and were made short work of by the knight and Schippietaro. The young warrior brought back the brave dog to his master, with 1,000 thanks. He told the father and mother that the maiden, their daughter, was free, and the people of the village that the fiend had claimed his last victim and would trouble them no more. You owe all this to the brave Schippietaro, he said, as he bade them farewell and went his way in search of fresh adventures. The end. And that's the tale of the brave Schippietaro, the brave dog. Thanks for listening. Please hit the like and share if you can. It does really help. Thank you for listening and many blessings.